Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are, and welcome to the 2021 RAISE Summit. And it is actually our 7th summit, and this is our 2nd virtual summit, because last year was virtual too. And my name is Miriam Aliso, and I am with the National RAISE Center, and I welcome you to this event. Okay. The first presentation is, like I said, is reopening of schools pre-ETS, secondary transition service delivery and COVID by Michael Stoehr. And then Ron Hager is gonna talk to us about making up the lost instructional time due to COVID. All right, so RAISE. Perhaps you have heard RAISE, National RAISE Center, RAISE for Transition, but actually it's an acronym. And RAISE is the National Resource for Advocacy, Independence, Self-Determination, and Employment Technical Assistance Center. And it works with the 8 Rehabilitation Service Administration, or RSA, funded parent training and information centers to develop and disseminate information and resources that increase capacity to serve youth and young adults with disabilities and their families. So here at RAISE, we have a very committed team to work with the RSA parent centers and actually all the parent centers across regions, because now they need to work with youth and they need to provide that they need to prove, they need to report what they are doing with youth engagement and transition. So now we have Michael Stoehr from NTACT, who's going to talk to us about the reopening of schools and pre-employment.
Thanks, Miriam. Appreciate that. And I think we're all set to go now. Switching screens, so I think we're good. So as Miriam mentioned, my name is Michael Stoehr, and I work for the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative. And I'm just going to go ahead and if folks could in the chat box just let us know who is here, that would be helpful. You know, what state you're from, and kind of give a shout out to yourself so we just kind of know who's participating today. As I mentioned, I do work for the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative. And just real quickly, who are we? We are a jointly funded project that is funded by OSEP, actually OSERS. It's a combination of both the Office of Special Education Programming as well as the Rehab Services Administration. So we are jointly funded. Our funding started this past October in 2020, and we're funded for 5 years. The center itself is made up of a number of universities. I work at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. However, our partner universities include East Tennessee State University, the George Washington University, Portland State Universities, and then the universities of Kansas, Maryland, and Oregon. The major purpose of NTACT, the Collaborative, is to work with students and youth and young adults, and actually looking at working with state education agencies and vocational rehabilitation agencies, as well as partner organizations and parent training centers throughout the country to support those youth and young adults with disabilities as they're preparing to graduate from high school, and really looking at preparing them to enroll in post-secondary education, gaining credentials and certificates and diplomas, as well as to be prepared for competitive integrated employment and to engage fully in the community. A little bit of ways to reach and connect with the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition, the Collaborative. We have a website, which is transitionta.org. It's still in the process of being updated, but if you go there, you can find information from both our old NTACT site as well as the former VR-funded site for Workforce Innovation and Technical Assistance Center, or WINTAC. Those materials are on there, as well as materials from our partner organizations. You can reach us by contacting ntact-collab@uncc.edu if you have questions. And also, we do have a listserv. So once a week, we send out for folks, stakeholders around secondary transition, a weekly email blast from NTACT the Collaborative. If you currently do not receive our email blast, please go to the website again, transitionta.org, and you can sign up for that weekly blast. And there's a ton of information. It's not just what's happening with NTACT the Collaborative, but it's really a hub for what's happening around secondary transition throughout the country. So today, after this brief welcome, I want to do a quick reopening snapshot as schools are returning to face-to-face instruction after the COVID-19 pandemic. Just kind of give you an idea of where we are with that nationally, and it is evolving and changing. I do want to also talk about some of the information that NTACT the Collaborative has shared with our education and VR partners around the country regarding how to work as collaboratively and most effectively as possible. Talking a little bit about the importance of administrative engagement, and as well as looking at crosswalking of interagency services and supports, interagency being not only education and vocational rehabilitation or VR, but also our other agency stakeholders and partners, the importance of engaging youth families in this process. And then lastly, I'm going to wrap up with some resources that we have found over the last year and a half to be really effective, whether those are done virtually and used virtually with students, youth, young adults in a hybrid model or in face-to-face learning. So we realize that things are changing. The world is, and our country in particular is getting back to pre-COVID-19 pandemic levels. However, it's still changing and things are still evolving. And depending on your state and local area, it is an evolving process. And I think it is important to keep that in mind, but also the importance that we in secondary transition, education, in VR, and our other stakeholders need to continue to work collaboratively as we move into this after COVID-19 phase. As of June 9th, so this is a few weeks ago, and as folks were wrapping up the 2020-2021 school year, this was the status of face-to-face instruction around the country. There were a couple states that still had ordered closures, but we did have 14 states that had mandated in-person instruction, and those are listed on there. I think it's important to note that throughout COVID-19 and the pandemic, that 36 states really left decisions about how students, youth, young adults were engaged in education up to their local school districts, to their LEAs. And that really was the majority of the states. I also wanted to provide you with this slide, and when you download the PowerPoint, you can click on these, but these are the current plans as of about a week ago from a handful of states. The reason why I provided these to you, it kind of gives an idea of what different states are doing regarding reopening. But I would strongly urge you to look at what your state is doing regarding reopening and how that's going to impact both school-age students in the education system, but then also how that is going to interplay with students as they're receiving services for vocational rehabilitation, whether they are potentially eligible students receiving pre-employment transition services or Pre-ETS, or eligible students who are receiving transition services through VR and employment-related services. So again, these links will take you to those states and what they're doing, but again, I would highly recommend checking to see what your state is doing in particular about reopening as far as face-to-face learning. And I want to stress that too, because learning and instruction didn't stop a year and a half ago. It changed in how those services were being delivered in a lot of states. There were some states that just kept on happening with face-to-face learning, but for those that did, this gives you an idea of what's happening there. I also wanted to provide just a few bits of information, and some of this, amazingly, even though it came out in March of 2021, is becoming a little dated as things that continue to evolve as we're moving into kind of the moving on from COVID-19 and the pandemic. But there was information and guidance put out from the U.S. Department of Education and a handbook. These links will take you to volumes 1 and 2 of that. There was also, on March 24th, a summit that featured district leaders, educators, as well as Dr. Jill Biden presented at this. And it was really to provide information regarding technical assistance and navigating the return to in-person learning across the country. And that link will take you to the summit, the reporting for that summit. The other link that's on here is regarding the American Rescue Plan. And I just wanted to mention, along with the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan, there were a lot of monies put out to states to assist in education, as well as looking at economic recovery for students, youth, families, as a result of the pandemic. But again, that just provides you some additional information. So this next section moves into really talking about looking at maintaining effective and strong partnerships, in particular between vocational rehabilitation and education for transition age students. And when I mention transition age students, depending on the state you are living in, talking about usually starting around age 14, the federal law, IDEA, mandates starting transition at age 16. A lot of states do start at 14, going up till age 21. We look at other systems, it actually goes to 24. And in one state in particular, in the state of Michigan, they look at providing instruction until age 25. But what I wanted to mention as we move into this section, that the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation, or OSERS. So that is, again, the governing organization for special education, as well as vocational rehabilitation, put out a letter back in August that basically highlighted the importance of education and vocational rehabilitation working together and collaboratively, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. They emphasized the importance of joint coordination and collaboration. They recognized that even though there were changes in difficulty, the legislation of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, and how that mandates pre-employment transition services and secondary transition services for VR, as well as IDA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that governs special education, did not change. So those requirements still needed to be met, and they encouraged both VR agencies and schools to take that opportunity during the pandemic to be flexible but still provide services. And now that we're moving into this after COVID-19 pandemic phase, how can that continue and that collaboration continue to be strengthened and really provide the best services for students, youth, young adults with disabilities? This slide highlights a document that OSERS developed, and let me pull it up. Hopefully you have seen this. This came out almost a year ago in August of 2020, but it's a transition guide. And I wanted to mention this and bring this to your attention if you haven't seen it, because it provides really excellent information regarding transition planning and, most importantly, joint transition planning. So there's information contained in here regarding the requirements for transition under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, as well as the Rehabilitation Act. It's updated by WIOA, or the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It provides information and guidance regarding looking at going on for competitive integrated employment and education goals, as well as looking at going on for post-secondary education and training, as well as looking at preparing students to be able to make the best student-made decisions, self-advocacy, self-determination. So again, this is a guide, it's free, it's downloadable. The link that's on the slide will take you directly there. And it's a transition guide put out again by OSERS. So we look at the importance of maintaining collaboration between VR, vocational rehabilitation, and the provider schools. And this slide provides a few tips regarding how to develop and maintain collaboration, not only with VR in education, but with all the other stakeholders that are involved in secondary transition for transition age student, youth, and young adults. It's important as we move into this next phase where things are returning back into face-to-face and in-person learning, that we also do not lose the strong connections, communication, and coordination between the partners. And I think from a perspective of families and advocates, really looking at these key points, right? So looking at how communication is being done, how information is being shared among the various agencies. And we're really at this point talking about how that's happening locally, right? With that individual school district, as well as the VR partners and the agency partners from mental health, intellectual developmental disabilities, folks that work with students on the autism spectrum, as well as our other agency partners, Department of Health folks also. But how is that information being shared? And identifying how services are being delivered. And in particular, as we look at pre-employment transition services from the VR lens, as well as looking at secondary transition services and activities provided by schools as required by IDEA, as well as keeping each other informed and updated on what is happening with those, again, students, youth, young adults that are being served. It's important that as we look at how services are being provided by VR and education, that we are looking at coordinating services so that what is being provided by VR is not supplanting what the requirements are in education based under the requirements of IDEA transition services. So really looking at, again, that coordination. What is the school providing for that young person, those students of transition age? And then how can that be supported by the VR system? So again, sharing schedules, sharing information. If assessment is occurring, sharing those assessment results between what is happening in education with what's happening in VR and what's happening with the other agency partners such as ID, DD, as well as mental health, behavioral health. So while it's important for the agencies to collaborate and the folks that are actually doing the work, so the teachers, the VR counselors, it's really also critical that at an administrative level, there is a discussion regarding how secondary transition services, activities, and supports are being provided. And again, from a advocacy lens, as a parent lens to all of this, really having discussions on in a local area. So, is at the local area a transition coordinating council or group? Do they meet? Is there an employment council with different stakeholders meeting? And if those meetings are occurring, is there a discussion regarding identifying common student outcomes? Is there a discussion on who is doing what and how information is being shared? And from an administrative lens, is that being supported? And is there guidance being provided from those administrators? And we talk about administrators both at the state level, the regional level, and the local level to support, again, the actual folks that are doing the work, working with those students, youth, young adults, and their families. This next slide, and some of this, as we talk about it, it comes across as, well, of course that should be happening, but really identifying who the points of contact are. So down to an individual student level, does that young person, that student, youth, young adult, and does their family member know who in that school district, who in that LEA is the person that's providing and supporting transition services? Is that the special education teacher? Is it a guidance counselor? Is it a transition coordinator? Who are those point people? And then conversely, who in the VR system is that point person for that school and that individual student, as well as who are providing support from the other stakeholder groups. So if the student is able to receive services, oftentimes through a county-based intellectual developmental disabilities office or a mental behavioral health office, who are those points of contact? And having that information available not only for the young person and their families, but also for the agencies, the educators themselves, so they're able to communicate and coordinate services. Identifying where those places are that those individuals can meet, allowing time and schedules for meetings to take place, whether it's a individual education program or an IEP, or an individual plan for employment that VR does, an IPE. How are those done? How are they supported administratively to happen in a coordinated fashion? This next slide is simply a graphic, and it depicts the various ways you can deliver pre-employment transition services, as well as educational activities and services under IDEA. And delivery should be tailored to meet the needs of each individual student, either through individualized instruction or delivered in a group setting or provided virtually. Almost all activities that can be done individually or in a group setting can be adapted to a virtual setting, so long as the student has access to the internet or a web-based platform. And I think what we have found over the last year and a half with COVID-19, that some of the most effective practices that we've often seen involve a combination of all three types of service delivery methods. And the discussions that we're having now nationally, both with states and then actually looking at local schools and their counterparts from VR and the other stakeholders, is how can we take the best that was learned during the last year and a half, looking at virtual, remote learning and those options and some of the resources that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. How can we make sure that we can continue to capture that information, as well as then looking at how can we ensure that this combination of service delivery can happen, both individual instruction as well as group instruction, as well as virtual. And when we talk about this, really looking at what's being provided through the education system, as well as through the VR system, the vocational rehabilitation system. Again, as we're looking at pre-employment transition services for Pre-ETS being delivered, as well as those educational services that are being provided. This next slide, I really do like, and it's something that we've been encouraging folks to look at, both from a state lens, but I think more importantly, the local lens. And it's really looking at identifying who are the key players. And in looking at this and looking at identifying who the key players are, it's really looking at who is doing what in a system. And we mentioned that a few minutes ago, you know, really looking at who are those folks that are doing this work in the education system and the VR system and our other stakeholder systems. So it's really looking at who are those partners, what do they provide, and then what is their role, how can we elicit their involvement in the process. And again, as I mentioned this could be something done state level, regional level, at a local level within that school, but this is also something that can be looked at an individual level based on an individual student. And I think it's important to mention that, again, the family is engaged in this process, as well as our family organizations are involved in this process. Again, if we're looking at a state, a regional, or a local level. This next slide looks at taking the IEP, or the individual education program, that is basically the blueprint or the guide for students in special education, and looking at matching that or crosswalking it with the individual plan for employment, or the ITE. So we look at this, it looks at, first of all, what is the school providing, and then the counterpart of what then VR can and is providing. Again, with the idea that they're supporting each other, that services are not being duplicated or in the case of what VR is providing, that it's supplanting what education is providing. Again, this is something that could be done at an individual level for an individual student, or also look more at a broader system look at what that school district is providing and what that VR system is providing for students in that school district. We emphasize, as we talk with both educators, VR staff, as well as other stakeholders, the importance of student, parent, family engagement. As we move more into face-to-face learning, this emphasis that the engagement and keeping everybody on the same page in what's happening is not lost. So that we're making sure that families and young folks are aware of the activities they're engaging in, the relevancy of those, and making sure that they're accessible and realistic. So even as students return and are moving back to full-time face-to-face learning, how is that information being provided? And what supplements can be done at home if a student returns 100% to face-to-face learning? What guidance and supports can still be offered in the community and the home? It's prioritizing what that student in youth, young adult is working on, both in school and again, what they're doing in the community, what they're doing after school, what they're doing in the summer. And the idea that we're not overwhelming, because prior to COVID-19, oftentimes families and youth and those were oftentimes felt very overwhelmed. So taking and making sure that we are being concise and consistent in what we're doing. Making sure, and this slide is from a lens of talking with professionals in education, VR, and other stakeholders, but making sure that there are times arranged to connect with families, that opportunities are being provided for families to connect to other families, for the young folks, the students, youth, young adults, to connect to peers and supports. And I think for both families and for young folks to celebrate those successes around secondary transition, right? So what that student is doing academically, the gains they're making towards being better prepared for competitive integrated employment, to go on to post-secondary education and training, to engage more fully in the community, and really celebrating those little steps, right? Those little gains. Some more information or some additional information about parent-family support. It's really important to reinforce expectations around competitive integrated employment, to help facilitate the process, right? And being mindful in the work that we're doing of the different diverse cultural backgrounds, economic backgrounds of the families and the youth that we're working with. Looking at, for youth and young adults, especially those with more engaged intellectual disabilities, looking at discussions around supported decision-making, looking at discussions around what it means to have a meaningful day around transition, aligning, as we had talked about before when we looked at the ITE and IEP, in that alignment and aligning those goals, right? That is a real important point. And then really looking at engaging that youth and family, asking the right questions to better understand what impacts that young person and what their vision, the young person's vision and the family's vision is for the future. And of course, and especially with the audience here kind of preaching to the choir, but ensuring that both at the state, regional, and local level, that education, VR, and other agency partners are aware of and working closely with their parent training centers. So the next piece that I'd like to move into is to talk about what we found over the last year and a half. In the last year and a half, we've done a lot of trainings, a lot of support around how best to provide services, both in a face-to-face, hybrid, and virtual learning model. And what these next series of slides are really looking at what materials are out there that we found to be effective from across the country. So I first wanted to mention this guide. And this guide was developed prior to NTACT, the collaborative. So this is when the center was still just NTACT, the National Technical Assistance Center on Transition. And in collaboration with the VR funded center, or WINTAC, the Workforce Innovation and Technical Assistance Center, created this guide. And basically what this guide is looking at how VR and education can work collaboratively, in looking at that coordination and collaboration of IDA and WIOA, and providing services, and particularly looking at pre-employment transition services. It's an excellent guide. You can find it on the Transition TA website that I mentioned earlier for NTACT, the collaborative. I also wanted to mention, if you haven't had a chance to view these, one of my counterparts and myself put together a 5-part webinar series. You again can find this by going directly on this link, or you can actually find it off of the NTACT collaborative website, transitionta.org. The 5-part webinar series looks at the 5 required pre-employment transition services. It divides them up. Each of the 5 required pre-employment transition services has its own webinar. In that webinar are a lot of resources and strategies to best support that particular pre-employment transition service. While we don't have time today to review all the great online resources we found over the last year and a half, I did want to share in this next series of slides a few things that we really found that were excellent. And this first thing that I want to mention to you, it's called the T-Folio. And it's a free transition portfolio tool for high school age students with disability. The tool was designed in Washington State through a collaboration of their VR system and their education system, and aligns both IEP transition planning as well as VR's pre-employment transition services. So it can be used both by educators as well as agency personnel. The T-Folio has 5 units that correspond to the 5 pre-employment transition services. And each unit is made up of a lesson guide with at least 1 activity. The lesson guides can be accessed from the lesson landing page and either followed online or saved as a PDF. And they can be filled out online. The PDF can be printed, and it also keeps track of the student's document in what is called the T-Folio Tracker. It's a really cool free device resource. Another resource that I wanted to mention, and for some reason this just wants to keep skipping around on me, which is so annoying, is, and I don't know if I can get back to it. I think I'm gonna have to, let me just do something here real quick, guys, before, for some reason, this is playing games with me. So just give me 1 second. So the next thing that I wanted to mention, and let me something here real quick so you can all see it, is explorework.com. And you may be aware of this. This was actually something that came out of the WINTAC, or the Workforce Innovation and Technical Assistance Center. And it is a site that explores, again, those 5 required pre-employment transition services. Through Explore Work, students can create a profile where work can be saved and their progress tracked through certificates of completion. And all student work is automatically shared via email with whoever adult helper is assigned to work with that young person. So be it a teacher, a VR counselor, or other provider. And Explore Work is also available in Spanish. And again, it's a really cool resource. Okay. The next thing that I wanted to mention, this actually comes from the state of West Virginia, and it's their Pathways to the Future. And this is actually a curriculum, but it includes lesson plans, lesson objectives, and detailed instruction to facilitate student learning. Again, it's based on the 5 required pre-employment services, but when this was developed, it was done in collaboration with the West Virginia Department of Education, as well as their VR system. The program, as I mentioned, includes sample worksheets, instructions, and resources that are embedded in those lessons, and the lessons can be adapted based on that individual student's needs. And I also wanted to mention that there's built-in accessibility. So there are videos and webinars that are captioned. The website offers an accessibility toolbar that includes things such as read aloud. There's a translation page, there's a text magnifier, as well as a picture dictionary. Other thing that I wanted to mention, and this came up a lot in the last year and a half with COVID, was how do you get kids out in the community to experience those community-based activities and services? And one of the sites that our friends in Nebraska put together, which was really excellent, were virtual industry tours, right? And this is really a great resource. It highlights hundreds of virtual industry career pathway opportunities. Even though it's from Nebraska, it really is relevant in other states. And in addition to the tours of the business and industries, the videos also contain interviews with employees and managers discussing the work requirements, education levels, salary, and job prospects. The videos provide an accurate picture of today's workplace, breaking down stereotypes and assumptions, while emphasizing the knowledge and skills required to be successful. And again, the links that are provided on this slide will take you directly there. And this is one of those sites too that as we move back into in-person instruction, face-to-face instruction, hopefully won't get lost, because it's something that could definitely be highlighted in collaboration with those actual in-person community-based tours. Next thing I wanted to mention, and this actually a site itself is amazing, Transition Tennessee out of the state of Tennessee, is the online home for training and resources in preparing students with disabilities for life after high school. So their transition site. Their goal from Transition Tennessee is to improve transition outcomes for youth and young adults with disabilities. The site's organized into different sections for education, educators, providers, and for students. And when you go into this site, each of the sections provides free video-based lessons, ideas, resources, as well as a lot more. And this slide highlights their course on pathways to self-determination. And there's 4 different lessons within that. They cover the importance of self-determination, self-advocacy. Lesson 3 in this series is self-management. And then there's a section on choice making and decision making. And I think this would be a nice counterpart to some of the presentations from last week's RAISE session, where you were talking about the importance of student, youth, young adult engagement. This next site is really pretty interesting. It comes out of the state of Alaska. It's called Stoehr, and it provides an introduction to entrepreneurship. And in this site, it's a very creative curriculum that includes 5 modules and introduces students to small business concepts as they work through setting a goal, develop a business plan, and putting that plan into action. And again, this is something that's ready to roll, and for either education folks or VR folks, other stakeholders to really access. Think College, probably a number of you are aware of the Think College resources. It's operated out of the Institute for Community Inclusion at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Think College creates and curates over 600 selected resources on a wide range of topics related for post-secondary education and training for students, youth, young adults with intellectual disabilities. And included along with these resources are some of the most frequently asked questions for families about options for going on for higher education training for students with intellectual disabilities. This next site is kind of an oldie, but still a goodie. So the Office of Disability Employment from the U.S. Department of Labor developed this site, Skills to Pay the Bills. And this focuses on work readiness and interpersonal soft skills for, again, those transition age students 14 to 21. The soft skills addressed in the curriculum are grouped into 6 categories with multiple lessons and activities. They're hands-on, they use the UDL or Universal Design Learning Principles. And the 6 core categories that are included in Skills to Pay the Bills include looking at communication, looking at teamwork, networking, problem solving, critical thinking, looking at professionalism as well as looking at enthusiasm on the job. MyFuture.com website was developed by the Department of Defense and features career, college, and military content that allows a youth, young adult student to explore possibilities to gain insight on different career pathways. It helps young adults plan next steps in life by bringing together the most recently available information about colleges, careers, and military services opportunities. And the cool thing about this is it's really looking at information from the U.S. Departments of Commerce, Defense, Education, and Labor, which is not really usually a lens that we look at. And on this site, students can find information on over 7,000 accredited colleges. It provides information on other training that's offered through the military, and what one needs to do to prepare to be successful in those opportunities for training. The Khan Academy is also a free website, and by the way, everything we're looking at is free and accessible online. The Khan Academy provides students with information on selecting and attending colleges based on interviews from admission officers from across the country. Included in this site are suggestions for students that they can do while they are still in high school, such as the importance of what courses they're taking, what activities they're involved with. And information is provided on the benefits of attending colleges, as well as how to overcome obstacles in both preparing and engaging in higher education. Reality Works provides free employable skill lessons, which were created to help and teach students the important soft skills needed to prepare for a career. Each lesson begins with an overview, lesson objectives, and an added guide glance table. Just a couple more that I wanted to go through quickly. Career Connect is another site, and this particular site is designed for students that are individuals that are blind or visually impaired, and it again provides specific information for that population of students. Map It, What Comes Next, was specifically designed looking at career and career pathways for students that are deaf and hearing impaired. Project 10 out of the state of Florida is one that I'm highlighting because it provides information not only on secondary transition areas for competitive integrated employment and going on for post-secondary education and training, but also, as you can see, it looks at some of those other areas for independent living, such as financial literacy, health, housing, leisure, recreation, and transportation. And as we wrap up, I just wanted to leave you with a couple parting words. Those resources, please check out. They really are excellent. There's plenty more. When you look at that series that I mentioned on 5 required pre-employment transition services off the NTACT site, there's actually a lot more that we hit on, but I think those were really helpful. As we're wrapping up, it's important, I think, as we're working and as we're moving from the pandemic back to face-to-face learning, that you're considering and keeping in mind the importance of communication, coordination, collaboration as we're working collaboratively. And Josie and whoever, questions? I know we only have about 5 minutes left, so fire away.
Okay, anyone who has a question, please put it in the chat box. If that is not accessible to you, we could certainly have you unmute if that is better. There is one question from Ron. May we share this PowerPoint with others in our network?
You certainly may share this PowerPoint. And I know it's on the RAISE site, so it should be downloadable.
Yes. Other questions? A lot of kudos and great jobs, Michael, which we know.
Oh, please, Josie.
Here's
embarrassing me.
Yeah, here's a question. Hold on, I have to scroll up one little bit. Okay, can you speak to customized employment as part of WIOA?
Sure. It is something that is required, both supported and customized employment. And it actually is supported, again, when the centers got renewed. it is, and I'm blanking on the exact name, but there is one of the VR funded centers that does look at, in particular, at supported and customized employment. I will say that it is and I'm not sure your exact question, but customized employment usually is looked at for those students that are going to have the most difficulty obtaining competitive integrated employment. The basis of it is really solid. You know, you're looking at the discovery process is what it's called, which is basically a person-centered assessment approach that looks at what that student is able to do, both academically and functionally, what their interests are, what their career interests are, and then it looks at that match with a business. And then the customized employment process itself then looks at matching that job or customizing that job for that young person to be successful. I think one of the things to mention with customized employment too is the range of what that could mean for somebody that has more complex support needs, that has a disability. It doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is going to be involved in a 40-hour work week. It may be involved in working a couple of days a week in a larger model of what is a meaningful week for that young person, but it's matching that so it truly is meaningful employment where that young person is at least making the minimum wage or above, and it's valuable work. So I think the process is really good. It is something that is supported, and it's something that is supported under WIOA.
Thank you. Another question is, can you point me to any data on outcomes from pre-ET activities?
There is information on the, if you go to the NTACT site, WinTACT part of that, there's a section that says Workforce Innovation and Technical Assistance Center or WinTACT or George Washington University. You can find it there. I believe there's also information out of the Quality Management Center that VR runs out of San Diego State University that has information on outcomes around pre-employment transition services in states.
Well, Michael, it appears that that is the end of the questions. Perfect timing.
With 1 minute to go, man.
Crazy. I know. So, Michael, thank you so much for doing this. And these resources, I think, number one, many of us didn't know all of them, let alone a few of them. So really appreciate that. And thank you for all the work that you've done. Everyone, we have a break for the next 10 minutes. So at 3 o'clock Eastern, we will start back up with our friend Ron Hager. So thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks. See you.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back and being with us. And I have the privilege of welcoming our longtime friend, Ron Hager, to present today. And literally every summit that we've had, Ron has shared with us and presented. And we are once again so excited for you to be with us, Ron. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Josie. And it is a pleasure for me to be back here with you this year. My name is Ron Hager. I'm a managing attorney with the National Disability Rights Network. For those of you who do not know NDRN or our system, we provide support to the protection and advocacy and client assistance programs around the country. There is a protection and advocacy program and client assistance program in every single state and territory. The client assistance programs are specifically funded to assist clients of the vocational rehabilitation system who either want information or advocacy on their behalf. And then the protection advocacy broader network provides representation and support for people with disabilities on any other issue that they may have. In the past, I've focused a lot of my time with you on updates on the policy level, but this year, given the amount of questions and misinformation going on about COVID related issues and making up for the lost services that so many people had because of COVID, that we thought we would make that the focus this year. I want to make sure there's also time for questions, but feel free to enter your questions in the chat box, and we've got great people monitoring, so they'll interrupt me if need be, or we'll have time at the end also to go through questions. And anyway, so let's start our session here. Of course, I got to remember to click it to get going. So one of the things that we've seen is that there's a lot of misinformation that's going on, as well as a lot of unknowns about what can happen, what should happen, what might be able to happen. So I wanted to start by laying a foundation about kind of the core principles and then use that to build off of. So the first thing is, what does the IDEA require, IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, require for students with disabilities? They're required to provide a free, appropriate public education. And that phrase appropriate was interpreted by the United States Supreme Court a few years ago in a case called Andrew F. And Andrew F dealt with what is the standard for appropriate? And they had basically two things to say. First, most students with disabilities spend most of their time in regular education. So for students that are in regular education, appropriateness of the individualized education program, or IEP, is typically determined by whether the student is advancing from grade to grade and achieving passing marks. It doesn't mean that they're always appropriate, but that's the typical test. Everyone else is judged by the level at which they're mastering the regular curriculum. That should be the basic standard for students with disabilities as well. For students who are not in the regular education classrooms, where they don't have that outside standard, Andrew F came up with a test that the IEP must be reasonably calculated to make progress in light of the child's circumstances. And we see the whole context of that quote. It is extremely clear that that phrase, in light of the child's circumstances, meant the disability related circumstances. How did that child's disability affect the student's ability to master the curriculum? That was the focus of the definition of appropriate in the Andrew F case. Right off the very beginning, from COVID back in March of 2020, the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, and the Office of Civil Rights, OCR, both say that the IDEA and Section 504 are still in full force, including school district obligations to provide FAPE to the students. Although it would be in a different setting, a different context, the COVID did not relieve school districts from their obligation to provide a FAPE. So that's the test as set up by the Supreme Court and by OSEP and OCR. What we've seen, unfortunately, right off the bat almost, was attempts, if you will, to use COVID as a cover and try to hide behind COVID as a way of alleviating requirements to provide appropriate services by many school districts and school district administrators and school district support people. And what we heard was, in a quote from one of the CASE, which is the advocacy program for special education administrators at the school district level, was that when we talk about FAPE, we don't have to provide comp ed for students under COVID, because the phrase from Andrew F, in light of the child's circumstances, means COVID, not the child with the disability circumstances, but the exigent, external circumstances. We also heard others saying that the phrase child circumstances could be amended to say current circumstances, again, meaning COVID. And what's sad is, I think the point was they were trying to avoid litigation by using these made up phrases that had no connection to any law or reality to try and give the school districts cover. But the more the school district used false legal standards as the basis for their decisions, the more trouble actually they would be in, the more likely there would be litigation. And we have met with OSEP a couple of times during COVID, most recently a month or so ago, and we raised this with them. And we explained this very issue, and they got it. And they have said that they're planning on additional clarification. So we're very hopeful that they make it very clear what the standard of Andrew F is. We haven't seen it yet, but we're hoping that they'll take that opportunity to clarify for the field, so we don't have all these false statements going on, which will result in unnecessary litigation. Similarly to the issue of what does the word appropriate mean or FAPE mean, we've also seen misstatements, misinformation about compensatory education or compensatory services. The phrase comp ed is the summary abbreviation for that. This came out from the Department of Education in March of 2020, which was the first statement they made about what is the school district's obligations under COVID. And what they said was that one of the things that the IEP teams will have to think about after COVID's over, if ever, is the need to look at the services that were provided to students with disabilities and whether there would need to be compensatory services provided to those students, making individualized determinations, not just, okay, everyone's going to get a day a month. That's going to be our comp ed. It's got to be individualized for the students with disabilities. And that, I think that should be a live link to that document. So that was the Department of Education's OSEP, Office of Special Education. They said that in 2020. In April 21, so a year later, in COVID handbook number 2, they talked again about what is the obligation for students, for school districts, for students with disabilities. And once again, they talked about the need to consider for students with disabilities whether there would need to be compensatory services to make up for skills that might have been lost during and because of COVID. If you notice, they talk about instruction to make up for skills that might have been lost. There's no statement of blame or accusation or the school screwed up. It's just a frank statement. If a student lost services, what can we do to make up those skills? So that was the Department of Education's OSEP. OCR basically said the exact same thing for Section 504. This came out in March of 2020. That Section 504 looks at both, it can cover both IEP and 504 in some ways. So what they said is either the IEP team or the 504 team needs to look at and make it, again, an individualized determination about whether and to what extent compensatory services are needed with respect to the applicable requirements, including to make up any skills that may have been lost. Almost the identical phrase as OSEP. So that's the official, if you will, legal criteria that you need to look at providing compensatory education to make up for skills that may have been lost because of COVID. That's the truth. So this is like truth or dare, or truth or consequences, or something like that. So these are the wrong views that we've heard about comp ed. One state said that there's different types of IEP services, mandatory and supplemental, and they only have to provide comp ed for what's called mandatory services. I never heard of such a thing. There's no basis in any law or regulation for such a thing. If it's in the IEP, it's mandatory. In other words, well, we have these services we're providing, but we really don't have to provide every service. I mean, where did that come from? It was literally invented. The other thing that we've heard a lot from a lot of others is that comp ed was only for intentional violations. And since this was not intentional, we don't have to do a thing. Again, if you looked at what OSEP and OCR said, they were talking about making up for instructional loss, independent of whether there was fault. Now, it is true that the comp ed standard was created as a result of due process hearings and a finding that a school district did not provide FAPE. And this was intended as a remedy to let the student make up for the things they did not get, but should have got. So that was where the concept came from, but it was never limited to that. So yes, part of the equation will be, did the student get the services that he or she needed? The second question will be, where is the student now? Where should they have been? And how are we going to catch that student up? That's really the proper approach to take for comp ed. And again, the more the school districts adopt these false standards, the more they're setting themselves up for trouble. We know there's going to be disagreements. We're human. We like to disagree with each other. But why have disagreements over things where there's no reason to? The disagreement should be on the on the substance, not on the procedure or the process. Now, I don't really care if a school district calls it comp ed. I want to just make sure that they're following the proper procedures and process, which is an individualized determination about whether this student will need support services to make up for skills that were lost. That's the important standard. It's easier for the school district if they just bite the bullet and call it comp ed, but if they want to call it standing on your head, we'll say fine. Now, before I turn to the specific question here of making up for instructional loss for students in transition, I wanted to give a little bit more basic information about the types of things that OSEP has just said as of April 2021 about strategies for making up instructional loss generally, and then we'll apply that to transition. So this came from the COVID-2 handbook, and there's about 20 pages in there that deal with making up instructional loss. And they're using this new phrase that I never heard of called acceleration learning. And then they had 4 places, 4 contexts in that which they went into some detail about what does this acceleration learning mean. The first one was what they called in-school acceleration. Then they talked about high quality tutoring, then out of school time. And the 4th one, which is on the next page, is summer services, summer learning. So this in-school acceleration, quote unquote, like I said, is this new phrase. Maybe it's been around for 1,000 years, new to me. And it really is a model for looking at how a student needs to learn. And it can apply whether or not there was COVID. So you take it, it's based on learning at the grade level, so that when you're remediating a student's or providing services to a student, you want to be focusing on making sure they're getting grade level content. But while they're getting the grade level content, you want to look back and see if there's gaps in their learning or things that they're missing that need to be remediated while you're still giving the grade level content. So you're not starting if you have to learn X before you get to Y, before you get to Z. You learn here the grade level content, and then we'll provide these other supports to fill in any of the gaps that you have to help you catch up. That's at least my understanding of what this all means. So the in-school acceleration is basically academics that are being provided to all students. Then in addition to this general in-school acceleration, they're also talking about high quality tutoring, which could be either in or out of school. And what I like about the way they talked about this is they talk about what's worked. What does the research show is effective at making progress with in-school tutoring? And they talked about having well-trained tutors or educators at least 3 days per week for at least 30 minutes per session in a group of 5 or less. So small group, regular, intensive instruction. I've heard, I can't remember what state it was, what school district, they're going to provide 30 minutes a week of instruction. So this does give us some context and what to shoot for. We're talking about tutoring. Again, this is for all students, not just students with disabilities. And I think this is a good framework to think about how we want to then add in the students with disabilities. Look first at the services the school district's providing to all students. The better their platform, the better they're conceptualized, their approach to remediation for all students, bring in the students with disabilities into that mix with supports or accommodations, the less there might need to be the individualized, the extra compensatory education services. Then they talked about out of school time, either before school, after school, during the summer, didn't really matter when, in the evenings, maybe like right after school. They wanted a couple of key contexts or concepts to make this type of out of school learning effective. One, make sure that you're giving access to academic support and enrichment activities, that you're aligned with the school curriculum, that you're using data to target students that need additional support. You're using either certified or appropriately trained and supervised teachers, and you're also giving some opportunity for hands-on or experiential learning. Then they went on to additional guidance or suggestions for summer learning and enrichment. And again, they talked about the typical characteristics for this to be effective. They said typically it's going to be voluntary, full day, 5 to 6 weeks is a typical program. They wanted to focus on academics for at least half the day, or roughly half the day, and other types of enrichment activities for the rest of the day. And they wanted to include both social, emotional learning and experiences, which we know for many students with disabilities who have been virtual for so long, that whether they had social or emotional issues before COVID, there may be many that will have those type of concerns when they come back to school. For students with disabilities that already had social and emotional issues as part of their disability, we could expect that there will be many that will have exacerbated conditions. So as we can address those issues before they return now during the summer, or even when they do return, we want to make sure that's part of the focus. We also talked about work-based learning and community services for, especially for older students, which is what we're going to be focusing on in just a second here. And also reducing any barriers such as transportation. There's a fight in New York City going on right now because in New York City, they're providing this enriched summer learning experience, but they're saying we don't have to provide transportation unless it's in the IEP. And there's a strong legal argument that even if it's not in the IEP or 504 plan, if they need transportation, this is something that's being offered to the students. If they need transportation for a student with disability to access that service, then it would still be required as a reasonable accommodation. And the Department of Education has encouraged the school districts and states to consider barriers. Again, this is not just for students with disabilities, any student that may need to have transportation. So that's the general statement for all students. And then at the end of this section, we talked about cross-cutting considerations. So we looked at those 4 frameworks for all students. We wanted to then look at how does that impact students with disabilities, English learners, and other underserved students. The first thing they said is in these regular education programs, make sure you're considering students with disabilities, English learners, and other underserved students as part of the mix, as part of the package of what you're doing for all students. Provide appropriate supports for these students to be engaged. The other thing they said is whatever regular instructional loss program you have, again, you're including the students with disabilities, but those services do not replace the IEP services going forward, the regular IEP services for a student each year. Part of the IEP services could be accommodations to access the instructional loss program. It does not replace extended school year services. So they talk about these extended school service programs for all students. Students with a disability may need additional or different extended school year services. And lastly, comp ed. So this is where the comp ed comes in again. So you have all these supports and services you're providing for all students. You still need to consider whether you also need to provide comp ed. So that's the basic general principles, operating principles that school districts should be considering as they're developing their back to learn school learning and remediation programs. So this is kind of summarizing what I've just said. You're going to provide appropriate remedial services for regular education services, regular education students, then adding in any supports that students with disabilities might need. Then in addition, you're going to consider whether that student will also need comp ed. And the purpose of this is from a court case. This is a quote. The purpose of compensatory ed is restorative. It's not punitive, it's restorative to put the student in the education position she would have been in had the district appropriately provided FAPE. So that's the basic operating concern and question, what we're looking at when we consider comp ed. So if you're working with families that are talking about, well, how am I going to, it's not easy. Some states do have a 1-for-1. If I missed an hour of speech, I get an hour of speech comp ed, but most have gone to this more catching the student up. It could take less time or more time to get the student back to where he or she should have been. And this is not something that's going to happen in a matter of weeks. They've been out of school or gotten whatever issues, less than perfect, less than good, less than what they needed for over, almost a year and a half. So it's going to take at least a year probably. So that's the other thing that schools should be considering is a long-term process, not just a quick and easy done. It's going to take a long period of time to catch students up. So that's the general principles. Then as we look at students who are aging out or who are close to graduation, there's a couple of things to consider. For the students who are aging out, who are getting up to that 21-year-old limit, there's a couple of different options. One of them is actually to extend eligibility beyond 21. And a number of states are looking at that. There's a couple of states that have already passed legislation to allow for this. Some states are looking at it through some kind of a regulation or public policy statement. And it's hard to say whether IDEA would cover someone post 21, but all the funds that they've been giving out right from the very beginning, the CARES Act fund, the ARP, every of these pots of money, that's short-term relatively. So you don't want to have, you want to have focusing on short-term remedies. So one of the things that you could use your COVID relief money for is to fund those extra years of eligibility for the students that are aging out. So this is kind of a little bit of a public policy pitch right here to have your state consider an extra year of eligibility. The other thing is for the students that are close to aging out while they're still in school, focusing on not just the academics, but focusing on experiential learning, hands-on learning, focus on work-based learning, focused on community services, community activities, community engagement. It helps the students stay engaged. It also is helping to prepare them for transition. So that would be things to consider as students are looking at aging out. For students that are graduating, many times a school district will give a student a diploma that really hasn't earned it. And they think they're doing a favor to the student. Oh, you're done. You can go on to the next phase of your life. But the student and or the family feels, well, they really need more time. They really need more support. Thank you for this diploma, but now what? So there's a regulation that I've given you in this PowerPoint that specifically says that graduation with a regular high school diploma is a change in placement requiring notice. So if a parent or child, depending on if they're 18, gets notice that they're graduating, they literally have the right to request a due process hearing to challenge the award of that diploma. And again, it's right in this regulation. It says that they have the right to request a due process hearing. Whenever you request a due process hearing, what happens? Stay put. You have to request the hearing to get stay put. So they say in June, we're going to be giving you your diploma. You get your notice, you request a hearing. While the hearing appeals are pending, that student stays in regular education. I mean, in education, they don't exit. They can continue to receive services. So that's one of the legal entitlements that students who have gotten that piece of paper have. And what OSEP has said, in addition to being able to maintain services while your due process hearing is going forward, the issue that on the merits will be, did the student properly receive that diploma? Does the student have the services, skills, supports that they need to be able to be successful in the next phase of their life? And one of the remedies that you can get in a case where the student is graduated, even though they've been graduated and technically they're done with their right to services under IDEA, you can still get comp ed for that student to make up for the lack of services that they got, even though they got a diploma. So one of the remedies for students that have gotten a diploma is to request a hearing and to request compensatory education. There's two different letters. This guy Rifle or woman, man, we don't know. 2 letters in the same year, and they said it twice, the same thing, that you can get comp ed even though you've already graduated. Well, I guess I'm sorry, I'm probably talking too fast. I get excited sometimes, I go crazy. So Students that have already graduated have the right to challenge that graduation, request a hearing, and get an award of comp ed. Obviously, you can settle that case and the district can agree to provide comp ed or can agree to provide an extra year of services. So we have the state level extra year of services. We could have individual determinations to provide services post quote unquote graduation, and they can figure out how to do it. Students who have aged out, so students that are done with their right to services under IDEA, because although they did not get a diploma, they've reached the end of service entitlement under IDEA. And I had said at a meeting a few months ago, some time ago, that I was concerned that the students that aged out may not be able to get comp ed because they're aged out. It's not a question of a diploma where they're still eligible age-wise. They're just past the age. And I think it was Peg Kinsell that said, oh no, there's a case that says that even if they've aged out, they still have a right to comp ed. And so this is the case. It's called Theron C. versus the School District of Philadelphia from the Third Circuit from 2010. It quotes an earlier case called Lester H. So this has got not just the Theron decision, but this other decision, Lester H. Both held the same thing, that even if a student has aged out, even if they're over the age of 21, they still can be eligible for comp ed because of the school district's failure to provide FAPE before the student turned 21. So this is a huge option for students that need more support, that need more services. Even though they've aged out, you can still get comp ed for those students. Typically, in these cases, it's going to come from requesting a due process hearing. And then the remedy, as part of the remedy from the due process hearing, would be to get an award of comp ed. It might be harder if the state hasn't extended services automatically to do that just informally. But you could always try to argue or ask the district to consider this without having to request a due process hearing. But if they refused, you could do a due process hearing request and that asks for the relief of the comp ed. I talk too fast. I'm so sorry. But anyway, I'm done with my formal slides. And I want to open it up for questions. We've got a good 25 minutes or so, 20 minutes at least. So don't be shy. I think we want to focus first on questions related to this. But if you have other questions that you wanted to ask me, we can open it up, depending on the time, we could open it up for other questions as well.
Thank you so much, Ron. This was super helpful and informative. As Lauren put in the chat, please type any questions. If the chat is not accessible to you, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
No, this is terrible. Come on, you guys, you never don't have questions.
True, true.
Normally I talk for 10 minutes and there's 4 hours of questions, so don't be shy. If you wanted me to go back over something, I can put my PowerPoint back up and go back to something. If you felt you missed something and you wanted to get a refresher on that, if I went too fast, I would definitely be happy to go back into my presentation.
Okay, here is a question. Would these services apply to students who participated in graduation ceremonies this spring? Oh, it just bumped up, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
But did receive their diploma.
See, that's the whole point. The issue for a right to a hearing is based on getting noticed. So they should have gotten a notice that they were graduating. Just the same notice you get every time there's an IEP team decision. They should have had a notice that you're getting a diploma and that it is a change in placement and you have all your rights, including requesting a hearing. If you didn't get the notice, no problem. even if you did get the notice, and even if you did accept a diploma, you have 2-year statute of limitations to request a hearing. I wouldn't say wait for 2 years. I would say, make your request, as soon as you can. But the fact that you've got the diploma is not, I don't think is a barrier to requesting a due process hearing.
Thank you. I'm going to guess, Sandra, that you have a question.
Yes. Hi, Ron. Thank you for all the great information. I was just wondering, I had a lot of complaints from parents that they were not receiving their transition services for their youth. Would Comp Ed, is this something that they can request, the transition services that they kind of received virtually, but not really, they didn't feel were appropriate, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, transition is part of the IEP. So the failure to provide appropriate transition is just like failure to provide appropriate speech. So yes, they can definitely ask for a Comp Ed, and it would be focused on the transition. So the remedy is focused on what the issue is. Now, let's say a student got nothing well. They got everything bad. The parents and student can work together and focus, what is the most important thing right now? And, as the student's getting closer to aging out, it may be more the transition services than the academics, but you want to look at the whole picture. And that's why you need to make these individualized determinations about what does the student need.
And I assume also that would go for lack of hours for speech therapy, occupational therapy, anything like that can be made up for this coming school year.
Yes, any of the services that were in the IEP, that's kind of the classic Comp Ed thing. They didn't get the service at all. And, because right from the beginning, right from March of 2020, they said you've got to provide FAPE, that if you want to change the IEP, you got to change the IEP. If you didn't change the IEP, then the IEP is the IEP. So whatever it said, and that's what they had to do. The other type of Comp Ed is, they got it, but it was terrible. Like a lot of the kids, especially that have significant disabilities, that didn't really benefit from the remote learning. It was basically a lost year and a half. For those students, Comp Ed is going to be significant. Even students with less significant disabilities did not do well in remote learning. I have a friend whose son has ADHD. He's, in all regular ed. I don't even think he has an IEP. I think he's a 504 student. But when he was on virtual, he was like all over. And, when he was then they moved to hybrid, and he was fine when he was in school, but he was terrible when he was virtual. So he would have a right to Comp Ed under Section 504 if the family chooses to pursue it. I don't think they will because he doesn't like school. So the last thing he wants is more school. But anyway, these are all individualized determinations that need to be made.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sandra and Ron. We have a couple more questions, and I wanted to bring something up. This is just a interesting point. My cousin's son, he's 6, I want to say, he has extreme ADHD, and he was trying to explain what it's like to have ADHD. And he said it's like being on a Zoom call and you're trying to pay attention to every single little box all at the same time. And I thought that was just a brilliant way of explaining it.
That's really great. Yeah, what happened with him, the cat went by. He thought, I'm hungry. I'm going to go to the refrigerator or whatever. Anything that he could he didn't have anyone there to physically refocus him.
Okay, so a question from Jerry Clark. Are there any class action suits that Disability Rights is managing related to these Comp Ed COVID topics?
As far as I know, there's one there's not really any meritorious class actions that I know of right now. There have been a lot of state complaints, OCR complaints that have been filed, and state complaints and OCR complaints can be systemic, which kind of makes it the equivalent of a class action. And in many of the state decisions, and the OCR decision, They're basically saying the same thing. It's hard to do a class action in a special education case, especially for comp ed, because the comp ed is individualized. You could potentially do a class action if they refuse to consider for anyone. If it was like, and the issue was just ordering a district to consider comp ed, that could be something that could be a class action. Otherwise, it's more like, in terms of the amount of time, it would probably be easier to do a state complaint or a OCR complaint.
Now the questions are coming in, Ron.
There you go. I've went there. So I knew I needed to save a lot of time for a reason.
That's right. That's right. So what if the district refuses to offer virtual learning to children in special ed next school year?
Well, that's a good point. Okay, so you have the need for individualized determinations about where the student is educated. What was happening when schools were closed, they were refusing to provide in-person learning. As schools opened, they refused to provide continued virtual learning. They need to do both. Okay. When they were closed, they should have been considering in-person for students that needed in-person. Now that they're opening or opened already, they need to consider continuing virtual instruction for some students. And they've done it before. There have always been immunocompromised students for whom it was not safe to be in with everyone else. And that's happened for years and years and years. So that concept is there in law and practice. So here we have a new group of students, a potentially larger group of students, that same basic principle applies. It is not safe for them to return to school, even though school's open. So you need to consider continuing to provide virtual instruction for that student. The beauty of what we learned from the remote platforms is teachers can record their class and they can do it in real time. And so you could have a student with a disability home watching the class and engaging in the class. I don't know if any of you saw the Olympic trials commercials, but there's two different commercials. One where a guy's in the hospital with a broken leg, and he's got this little thing like a robot that's going down the hall, and he's going to ask this girl out to the dance. And there was another one with a similar situation where I can't remember it's a girl doing something. They've actually had those for years. I'm not saying a school district has to do that, but they could do that. That would be a perfect way of using assistive technology to fully include a student with a disability in the regular class and in the non-academic, which is also a critical part of a school day. So they need to be considering for students who may need to be continued virtual because of immune issues or other issues related to their disability.
And I think that recapping what you said, if it relates back to their health, their safety, or being able to receive the free appropriate public education, then that could be a request, whether it was COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID.
Yeah, the same principle has applied forever, but now you may have additional students for whom they may need it because of their immune systems or whatever, that COVID makes a greater risk, even with vaccines and masks and everything else. We know there are some people for whom returning to school is going to be dangerous.
Okay, now we're building up on questions and we're cutting down on time. So, and what if, so we're going back to this notice of graduation, change in placement that struck a chord with people. So what if the notice was not given in the preferred language as they are English as second language learners?
The definition of notice in the IDEA regulations is it's got to be in the mode of communication of the home. So it didn't happen. If they gave notice and not in the language of the home, it's as if nothing ever happened. There was no notice. It's basically so that they have the same rights. They request a hearing and they add to their complaint that it was not in the mode of communication of the home.
So basically, they didn't receive notice.
That's right. It's zero. Yes.
Okay. To clarify, when you say given notice, you are referring to the requirement to provide prior written notice, correct?
Correct. They actually use the phrase prior written notice in the regulation. I just didn't put it in the thing because I wanted to be more inclusive, not technical, but it is prior written notice. Exactly.
Ron, are you able to see the chat box right now? There's this kind of
I can
longer
look, yeah.
one.
Hang on, let me see. I can, where is it?
It's from Barbara.
Barb, to everyone?
Yes, and it looks like it's like 14 up from the bottom.
Okay, is this Barbara, great, New York State Department of Education, supplement number 2, is that it? No?
Yes, that's it.
Oh, she's talking about a commentary that New York State had. I don't see a question there.
Okay. That's why I had you look, because I
And
am
then
not
there's-
great at reading.
And I can follow. I've got Doreen. Is that the next one you've got?
Yes.
Okay, what to do when an LE offers ESY as part of the summer camp program, but the hours don't work for the parents' childcare needs and it already made other arrangements. There's 2 different kinds of extended school year. I mean, there's the general program that we're offering to everyone, which it is what it is. If it's a special ed ESY service, you could potentially have some ability to argue for when that would occur. The definition of extended school year means both before or after school, as well as during the summer when school's not in session. It should be individualized so that it's kind of a hard to answer specifically, but if it's a generic program for all students, they would have to provide reasonable accommodations to the student to enable him or her to participate, but they would not have to accommodate the parents. However, if it's a special ed ESY service, I think they should consider the availability of parents, but I don't think there's any clear law on that.
So I'm jumping down to Barb. Could you give some more examples of how comp ed might look for a student who has already received their diploma?
Okay, they got their diploma. They missed let's say they missed almost all of the last year and a half. They didn't get geography. They didn't get their 3rd math. They got a gift. They got an A for math 4 or math 3, but they really didn't learn math 3 or math 4. And so they're not going to be prepared for college. So one of the things on the academic side could be tutoring to enable that student to get the skills they need to understand and be ready for college level math, or fill in the academic subject. So that would be one type of comp ed for the student that needs academic support to be ready for college, let's say. They could also provide it in conjunction with college, so that while they're in college, they could be getting remediation paid for by the school district to help them be successful. On the non-academic side, behavioral, emotional issues, if they were in a career tech class, like welding or the auto mechanics one that was on the PowerPoint from Michael, they could get an extra year or extra semester of that. So it's going to be exactly what it is that they're missing. Again, you've got a year and a half of loss. There's only so much time. So I would say that the families should be focusing on what they want to focus on. I mean, they can go for everything if they want, but they need to really probably, in my view, prioritize what they think is most important to get them ready for the next phase of their life. So think about transition. Where is the student now? Where do we want the student to be when they're done with school? What are the steps we need to get them there? That's the normal transition 101. So comp ed for transition services is, where is the student now without COVID? Where do we want them to be? So it's the same question. It's just a different time frame to work on it.
Okay, we have about 3 more questions in about 4 minutes. Will a student qualify for comp services since he was virtual since COVID started and will age out in January of 22.
Yeah, see, that's exactly the student. They're going to age out in January. Are they going to get what they need to make up for what they lost by January? If not, then even though they're aging out, they have the right to request comp ed as a remedy for not getting what they needed to get while they still were in school. That's that's basically what those court cases have said.
Thank you. Another question, can you advise if schools are required to complete assessments for conditions such as autism if medical providers have a waiting list or have postponed evaluations for the past year and a half?
There have been some cases about not doing the evaluations. In California, there was a state complaint about that. And there's been, basically the guidance from the Department of Education is they're supposed to be getting evaluations done during COVID. And for autism, you don't necessarily have to have, or for ADHD, you don't necessarily have to have a medical diagnosis of autism. So the school district needs to have the information they need. It doesn't have to be what they say they need or what they think they need. So they have to do the evaluations, get the information, and make the eligibility determinations, develop the IEPs. And if they don't, that's another example of when comp ed would come in. So if they didn't do anything for a year and a half because they were totally, we can't get it, we can't get it, we can't get it. It doesn't matter whether they were intentional or not. They didn't do it, they should have done it, it didn't happen. So that would be another case for comp ed.
We got a couple comments here that school districts or states such as Illinois are only considering letting kids work from home if they are homebound. Otherwise, they have to do in person, which, I mean, I think that's a concern that is going to pop up repeatedly because of lack of funding, a lack of teaching staff, etc.
I guess I don't understand what they mean by homebound. You mean they're never leaving the home at all? Is that what they're saying? That unless you're never leaving the home, even to take a walk around the house outside, you can't get home instruction? I don't know. I mean, if that's what they're saying, it's got to be an individualized determination. I mean, if a parent says it's too dangerous for my kid to go to school, but the kid's playing basketball with a bunch of other kids after school and they're hanging out together in an auditorium with no ventilation, then that's probably a right for the school to say, well, how sick is he really? So you can't be inconsistent. If you're saying he's too sick to go to school, you have to look at, the school could say, well, you got to be consistent. So it really depends on what it means, what they're saying. They have to be making an individualized determination based on at this point, really the health needs of that student. They would be, in my view, you would add in a diagnosis of other health impaired to their classification. And
coming from a non-legal standpoint, because I'm not a lawyer, I would think that
the best way possible.
Right. There's a reason I didn't go to law school, Ron.
Yeah, and there's a reason lawyers have a bad reputation.
But I think that for that homebound question, it would be reasonable to consider a student to be homebound and request homebound accommodations if the individual does have a higher vulnerability to COVID-19. And so I don't think that that's not a possibility. Is that correct?
I agree. Yeah. And like I said, if they're saying that they're homebound, they can't go out because of COVID, but they're running all over the place, going everywhere, then, no. But if they're really limited, maybe not, it doesn't mean you have to be like this, a boy in a bubble or a girl in a bubble to be eligible for homebound, in my opinion.
Yeah. So real quick, two more. So the New York City transportation case that you mentioned, can you explain the tenets of the case? Why wouldn't the need for transportation be included in the student's IEP prior to COVID?
Well, what happened in New York City was they have the kids that get extended school year services. What they did, and they had summer programs for some students. What New York City did is offer, and what COVID Handbook 2 says, offered an enrichment summer program for all students in the city, no matter who you were, so that a student with a disability that typically would not have gone to extended school year services because they didn't really need it, now has the opportunity to participate in this all student extended school year program. And because of COVID, they may need and may want to go to that program. So the question is, if a school district is offering a program for all students under the ADA and Section 504 reasonable accommodation requirements, you have to accommodate the needs of the student with a disability to participate in that program. It's not a typical ESY program, therefore it was not in their IEP. And I read the letter that was written to the New York City school district about this, and I talked to a reporter about it. And basically I said to the reporter, what's in that letter, I agree with. So
Okay, there's a lot of comment here. I'm not going to read it, but the last question here is, what do you think about parent who exercises their ability to keep the student in school beyond age 18 and declines graduation? Student then is not allowed to have a social graduation or to walk at graduation, doesn't get the diploma according to the parents stay put, but also doesn't want to provide a compensatory services either. Can the school have it both ways?
well, see, the reason why New York adopted this quote unquote IEP diploma was to enable a student to have that experience, but still have the right to continue going on in school post 18. And I think that the problem with the IEP diploma is it was confusing about, well, is it a diploma or isn't it? But the purpose is, here's a kid that's been included for their entire life. We want that student to participate in the same way with everyone else, even though they will have the right to continue going on in education. And if a school district says no to that, they're being cruel and evil. And I would challenge it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the student that does not earn a regular diploma has the right. You don't even have to argue about comp ed because they don't have a diploma. They can get both services, the regular services that a student post 18 would have gotten pre-COVID, as well as any comp ed. So the parent and the student can have it both ways. This, not the school. I think the school is just being evil.
Okay, well, we have no more questions at this point. Thank you so much, Ron. That was so informative. And I think there's so many new little caveats going on, but this is probably not the end of this conversation.
And again, thank you so much for having the opportunity to have me here. And I knew I would need a good 25 minutes for questions. And anytime you need me to come back, I'm happy to do it. I love working with you guys. I love working with the parent training centers. As you may know, I was on the board of Parent Network for many, many, many years. Have worked with many parent training centers all over the country. So thank you.
Ron, if you're able to type, there's a question from Diane Perry. Could you answer that in the chat? If you just scroll
Where's
up a little
Diane
bit.
Perry?
And I'm sure everyone's interested in the answer. So
Diane.
Everyone, thank you so much for allowing us to spend this afternoon with you. It was wonderful to be able to share some new information and to, I hope, be able to clarify some things that I know a lot of the parent centers have been working on for the past year and a half. So thank you for joining us today. And if you joined us last week as well, thank you.
And the question regarding from Diane Perry is, don't know. We met with them. They said they were going to send out new guidance, but we don't know when. But it's better come out soon because we need it soon.
Yeah,
that's all I can tell you. All right,
thank you, Ron. So I hope that you were able to get some answers to your questions. As always, if you wake up tonight at 3 a.m. and you're thinking something important that you wish you would have asked Ron or Michael, email us. You can go to the raisecenter.org website. There's a contact us button and we will get your emails. Further, Lauren in this chat has put the link to our survey. Please, please fill it out. That will be so helpful as we are developing new products and planning for next year. Next year, I hope to be in person again for our summit. So hopefully I'll actually get to see you all there. Thanks, everyone. Have a